All right, if you're still here in Data Sources 1, we are in the last substantive section of the presentation, Section 5, Data for Minoritized and Underrepresented Groups. Once again, I'm Ryan Womack, Data Librarian at Rutgers University Libraries, and this is again a topic that for this general overview I am just going to scratch the surface, but I want to highlight for you some of the projects, special collections, things you can think about in this area, and point you at the end to one resources guide to further information. So I'm going to start by populating my tabs from Section 5 on the guide. Again, the link to this guide is in the description below. And we'll start talking here. So in the earlier section, we spent a lot of time talking about ICPSR because they are just such a rich source of information, of data. And one of their topical centers is the Resource Center for Minority Data. And so this is a site with a number of data sources which you can sort of dig into by topic. And when you search, you will see there are, in this case, this is an alphabetical listing. Let me sort it by relevance. I think I prefer that view. Maybe they've defaulted to that here. This is different than the usual ICPSR behavior. We're getting an alphabetical list, so a lot of these are just these ABC News polls, but then we get into specialized resources on African American issues, right? And so Black American Perspectives, The Future of Civil Rights in 1991, Multiracial Post-Election Survey 2008 and 12, 16, and 20, right? Things for specific locations like Detroit Area Study, and historical information, this database about the reported values of enslaved persons pre-Civil War. So like any other ICPSR search, you can find a whole range of different data sources, but the guides here are really focused on this particular portal, right? So there are learning materials, there are tools for accessing this information, and with a sort of special focus here, like this anti-racism data reuse guide. So helping you to dig into the ICPSR collections to surface material that has this focus on groups that have historically not been a general focus of research to the same degree. So I'm just curious about this, like racial tensions. There's a subject term for that that's been tagged across the ICPSR database, and we can see specific polls and data on conflict, racial tension, each of these being, as in the other time we talked about ICPSR, a data set of its own that can be downloaded once you log into ICPSR. Okay, so that was the Resource Center for Minority Data. Another project, again, I'm just highlighting a few projects. I'm not claiming that this is extensive, but to give you an idea of what's out there, diversitydatakids.org is an example of a nonprofit organization that is focused on child development, and specifically sort of, as they say, racial ethnic equity in neighborhood educational opportunities. And they have a bunch of data sets, right? So they have over 300 data sets, their own child opportunity index that they work on, and lots of related issues, right? So single parent families by race, ethnicity, all things that are kind of analyzed along these dimensions. And they're working again with census data and major public sources that we've already seen, but they have gone and made those analyses to answer the specific needs that they're focused on. And you might also find these interesting and useful for you. Okay, keep going. U.S. Department of Education has a collection of data on civil rights since 1968. So civil rights in education, and you can go to their data page and download data files, historical data. Another data source that's in this case specifically about education and factors that are tied to civil rights issues, right? So race, ethnicity, sex, disability, English learners, and the school opportunities and problems that are associated with that. So that's the civil rights data collection. We have sort of more specific projects that arise out of interests of specific research groups and also possibly grant-funded projects. So this sentencing project is one, and the sentencing project is about, as they say, racial, ethnic, economic, and gender justice in imprisonment and criminalization of youth and adults, right? So we know that the United States has one of the largest rates of incarceration in the world, and also something that is heavily influenced by racial, ethnic equity issues. This site kind of collects and reports on that issue, and again, they have, as we've seen, this approach of like find a site that focuses on your topic of interest and then look for their data section, right? So they have a data tool that lets you go in state by state and extract these incarceration figures and make comparisons, right? So if we wanted to compare New York to New York, New Jersey to New York, imprisonment rates, black-white disparity, Latino-white disparity, we have this nice tool to enable us to do that. So this is an example of a kind of a special project focus that highlights significant data relevant to the topic. Then I have two mapping sites. Earlier in the text, I don't know if I said that as I've been describing it, but I said I would allude to science and humanities data a bit. The science data, we talked a little bit about the climate data at the NOAA site, and I would say these sites have a little bit of a humanities approach in the sense that they are historical visual storytelling, although it's certainly social science. focused. Mapping inequality is about the literal practice of redlining, that we can see the, actually I should start with explore the maps here, right? So we can visit the United States virtually. We can zoom in on different locations. This time I'll go to Philadelphia instead of New York. And we can see the property valuation maps that were made at the time. And this was in the 1930s. And the people who walked around and evaluated property made these comments, right? They were trying to analyze what are the high value neighborhoods, what areas are going to be growing in value or lowering in value. And this simple fact of growth in African American population was viewed as a detrimental influence, right? That by itself, not crime rates, not other things, but the racial composition of a neighborhood was reducing the value, not after the fact, but before the fact, because these were the maps that were used to evaluate property values prior to actual sales and things. So there's really a very rich level of detail here, because all of the original maps are reproduced with their remarks and the scan of the information that was put in, and lots of contextual information, lots of historical data in this very rich interactive project, right? So that's mapping inequality. Mapping prejudice is something similar. I won't really dig into this one as much, but this is a similar project that analyzes the, in this case, the racial covenants, right? The resale clauses in contracts and where those were occurring, when they were occurring, right? And so you can take a look at the mapping related to this project as well. Okay, let me not dig into the details of that project, but just know that these kind of I want to call them specialized, because they are not like they're focused on a time period or a location or a topic in a way that a more general source is not, but they can have tremendous value for uncovering this information that was in the past, not presented in a systematic way as true research data, right? That can be fully analyzed. And so you need, when you're looking for data on groups that are not well represented in the data, and I'm most of my examples here are racial in nature, but you can think about things like LGBTQ issues, where there are many times and places where that data is unavailable, masked, hidden, treated in a completely different way. And on any of these kind of sensitive topics, there may be issues of, even when we want to start collecting data, how are we asking people these questions? how are we safeguarding data? Are people comfortable sharing information? And the other point that I want to make is you have to be very careful about kind of privileging the official sources in these cases when the official sources are flawed or missing in how they represent groups that were historically discriminated against. So I want to, my last example in this section is this really interesting historical chart. I've given you a link to this sort of one-pager chart. There's a second link for further information that gives you even more background on race in the United States, race and ethnicity, as it has been defined by the census. So, one of the issues with race is that there are categories that are set. The Census Bureau itself has been one of the major places where the categories get defined, and then we can measure them, which in a way reinforces, it illuminates, but it also reinforces the categorization of people by race and ethnicity. And we should be aware that this has changed quite a lot over time. So like in this diagram, we can go back and see the various terminology approaches to identifying African American populations. When you mouse over something, you will get a description of the way things were labeled and what changes were made from year to year. The word black was not used in the census until 1970, for example. And ethnic groups, certain ethnic groups have been counted and then not counted and then treated in different ways over time. Chinese, as one of the early identifiable Asian immigrant groups, were simply counted as Chinese, but others were not. And then the other Asian American groups sort of come in and out of the categories over time in different ways. And this is why a site like IPPMS that actually attempts to harmonize this stuff is taking on a challenging role, but it's something that anyone looking at historical race and ethnic data needs to know about, to be aware of. This is just one way to look at this issue, and so I think that's enough about the census. But let me close by pointing you to this anti-racism resources guide. This is by a group that worked on this in IASIST, the International Association for Social Science, Information Service, and Technology. That's a group of data professionals. And this guide has many sections that kind of delve into these issues, both for the U.S. and other countries as well. It outlines, probably in greater detail than what I've talked about, let me say certainly in greater detail than I've talked about, the various sources involved and the approaches you might want to take. And finally, it concludes with a list of resources that you can browse for specific ideas. The list is linked. Where is the list link? Linked. Did I put it here? This one. Okay, yeah. So, sorry, I was just having trouble finding that for a second. This first link, datasets, projects, and data sources in CSV format, is a downloadable list of many race and ethnic specific data sources that you can take a look at. And so the guide walks you through some of those ways to explore for more information, but the list itself is quite useful. So there are probably many other resource guides that are available, but I'm just highlighting that one. There is work on an LGBTQ guide going on from IASSIST that I should eventually link to here as well. But it's a complex area that we should be more attentive to. And I've tried to give you, some ideas of some tools that can be used to explore that data on historically marginalized groups. Okay, so let me end the section 5, and I will conclude with this time a really short video on the pointers to other sites, but just keeping with the tradition of each section having its own video, I will do that. So see you in the concluding section in just a moment. And I'd like to conclude.